You so much for coming. Becky is here with us. Thank you so much to Kaylee, our event coordinator, for dealing with all the technical stuff. Hopefully, that means that we won't have any technical issues. I strongly recommend that you move to speaker view in the top right hand corner of your Zoom, just above the picture. You can change it to speaker view. And that way you don't see all 30 plus people through the event. So first of all, I would like to start off with an acknowledgement of land. We have a lot of people from across Turtle Island and abroad joining us today, so thank you very much. I am currently sitting in Tekaronto, as is Becky and Kaylee and many of us, which has for thousands of years been the traditional land of the Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee Nation, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and I feel grateful and very privileged to have the opportunity to work in this community on their territory. So before we start, we've added a new little twist to the author talks, and that is I'm going to ask Becky to share with us what she is reading right now, why, and basically plug a new book for all of you to add to your to be read list. Mine is huge, so Becky.
Great, thanks, Allison, and thank you all of you for joining us today. It's so nice to see some friends and family and others. Lovely to see you all. I'm reading a bunch of things. I don't always read multiple books at the same time, but I am right now. And one of the things I'm doing is my next door neighbor and I discovered that we both really like Catherine Bush. And so we decided we were going to read all of her books together over the course of the pandemic. So Catherine's written 5 novels. So I read Accusation first, and then I just started Rules of Engagement, and my neighbor's reading Minus Time and Claire's Head. And then we're both really excited. We're going to at the same time read Blaise Island, which is Catherine's newest novel, which is about a climate scientist living on an island, I think, on the east coast of Canada. And I'm really excited to read it because it's roughly based around the story of The Tempest, of Shakespeare's The Tempest, which is a play I love. So
yeah. I love Catherine. Kaylee can share a link to Catherine's website, and feel free to buy it from alllitup.ca or a bunch of indie bookstores or any indie bookstore near you. Before we get to reading, Becky, I hope that you'll give me this opportunity to share your bio, and then we'll move to a quick reading. Followed by some questions and answers. And if any of you are inspired to ask any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat, and Kaylee will present them for you at the end. Becky Blake is a 2-time winner of the CBC Literary Prize for Nonfiction in 2017 and Fiction in 2013. Becky's stories and essays have appeared in publications across Canada. Becky teaches creative writing at the University of Toronto's Continuing Education Center and holds an MFA at the University of Guelph. Proof I Was Here is her debut novel, and it was published by Woolsack and Wynn's Buckrider Books imprint. You can find out all about her at her website, www.beckyblake.ca, and she's on all social media platforms. Becky, I'm so excited to hear you from Proof I Was Here. Definitely on the top of my list of to read books. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can't wait for you to share it with everyone right now.
Thank you. It's really nice to have this opportunity this is my first online event for the book. And so I can see there's lots of people here that weren't able to join when the book came out to come to in-person events. So this is a special opportunity, and it's lovely to be able to share it with people in different parts of Canada. Okay, I'm going to just read a short excerpt from early on in the book. So the main character is she's a young Canadian artist, and she's just moved to Barcelona. And on the afternoon previous to this scene, her fiance suddenly dumps her. And so she's been just riding all night on the subway train just before this scene starts. By 8 a.m., the train had picked up speed, and there were people around me again sitting tall and self-important in their church clothes. The artificial light exposed everyone's flaws, their undyed roots, razor-burned chins, and sweat stains. I closed my eyes and didn't bother to open them again, even when passengers sat down beside me. For a long time, there was only the weight of strangers' bodies coming and going. One particular body eventually caught my attention because it smelled like the outdoors, sea air mixed with soil and exhaust. I shifted slightly away, then thought I felt something touch me. I reached my hand into my pocket before remembering I had no keys, no money to protect. Instead, I felt the brush of retreating fingers. I straightened up and opened my eyes. Sitting beside me was a young guy with gold brown skin and dark eyes. He wore a folded bandana over a mess of black hair and a dirty leather cuff around each of his wrists. Both hands were on his knees now where I could see them. He was looking down at his fingers. Mejor quédate despierta, he said. The sense of his words burst in on me without knocking. Growing up, when my mom was working late, our neighbor Rosa had always said the same thing to me if I started to fall asleep on her couch. It's better if you stay awake. I took a moment to rearrange my limited Spanish vocabulary, then told him that I didn't need to stay awake. There was nothing in my pockets. He turned to study me, and the light in the metro flickered. For a second, he looked like a small boy, vulnerable. Then he was a young man again, a thief. Something raw and open passed between us. It felt like recognition. I watched him walk down the length of the train, nobody looking as he passed. A tourist couple was blocking one of the doors, pointing up at a metro map. The woman had a knapsack on her back, and the pickpocket stopped behind her. The train made a sudden snaking motion as it entered a new tunnel, and the woman stumbled, then regained her balance. It had happened so fast I wasn't sure I'd really seen him do it, just a quick flash of motion behind her back. I almost called out to the tourists, but I changed my mind. They were laughing together, the woman holding onto the man's arm. Honeymooners, maybe. It was stupid to live like that, like children in adult bodies, so trusting and unprotected. A recorded voice announced the name of the next station, Irquinaona, and the train began to slow. The pickpocket glanced back at me, then disappeared through the open door. All the blood in my body rushed to my legs as I stood up, propelled by one thought only. I needed to go where he was going. I stepped off the train just as the doors were closing. The pickpocket was already on the escalator halfway to the top. I squeezed my way around people until I was almost close enough to touch him. Through his thin t-shirt, his shoulder blades looked like handles I could grab. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. I followed him for a block, keeping a little distance between us. At the corner, he stopped at a red light, and I came up beside him, my heart knocking hard. He turned, and I forced myself to meet his gaze. One of his dark eyes was a little sleepy, and beneath it, a constellation of freckles was scattered across his cheek. His nose pointed slightly in the other direction, as though it had been badly broken. When the light changed from red to green, he gave me a small nod, and I felt like we were making a deal. I wasn't sure for what. We began to walk together, first along the top edge of the Gothic quarter, then into El Raval, the neighborhood on the opposite side of La Rambla. I'd been to El Raval a few nights before with Peter. We had planned to eat dinner there, but we hadn't really felt safe. There were fewer street lamps, and after taking a wrong turn, we'd ended up in a dark alley full of beggars and junkies. I'd seen a splash of fresh blood on the cobblestones. The pickpocket shifted closer to me on the sidewalk as we squeezed by a group of men gathered in front of a butcher shop. They were talking in a language I didn't recognize, and they watched us as we passed. Above my head, laundry flapped from balconies. I heard babies crying, and somewhere a car alarm was going off. A man in a tall suit shuffled by. There was something wrong with his feet. When I turned to look, I saw that one of his legs was fake, and it had twisted around and was pointing in the wrong direction. The sadness in the city kept creeping up behind me, tapping me on the shoulder. Look, it seemed to be saying, look here and here and here. I followed the pickpocket through a stone archway. A tarnished plaque said we were entering the grounds of the city's first hospital, no longer in use. There was a damp, hurt smell coming from inside the courtyard. When we walked toward it, I saw a man pulling a needle out of his arm, another washing his shirt in the fountain. 2 others were yelling back and forth, hands in the air. All of them stopped as we entered, and I stopped too. The pickpocket looked back to see if I was coming, and I searched his face for a promise of safety that wasn't there. When I moved toward him again, he led me into a shadowed corner that smelled like piss and orange blossoms. Behind a pillar, he bent down and swung open a metal grate. Inside was a dusty green knapsack. I heard him rummaging through the pockets, and when he turned, he handed me a cream-filled pastry in a plastic wrapper. His fingernails were dirty. Tienes que comer, he said. You have to eat. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I loved that, the introduction of Manu and the relationship that they have. I really felt at other parts in the novel like I missed him. Like I was actively missing him and wondering what was going on in his life, and you know, how his family was. And that's the power. I really was immersed in these characters' lives, like all of them, even the peripheral ones, and even some of the tourists. Some, you know, some of the tourists, I was just like, okay, that's a life changing moment. But so I'm gonna start off by asking you about these characters and the inspiration behind many of them. I know you lived in Barcelona for many years, for a few years. And so I want to know, were these characters born out of an experience in Barcelona, or are they, you know, amalgams of people that you know, and just sprinkled with Barcelona?
That's a great question. I I think this book was inspired by living in Barcelona, and when I first moved there, I lived in a very rough neighborhood. So I I would see people who had just been robbed every day. In fact, I couldn't figure out what was going on because there were always people sitting on this one bench in my neighborhood crying, and I thought maybe it was like some kind of like cursed park bench or something that just people would make people really miserable when they sat on it. But then I realized that it was often people who had just been robbed because there were so many thieves in my neighborhood.
Wow.
And then I became really interested in sort of thinking about having your things stolen as being like a sort of micro loss that happens to some people. And I know it feels really devastating to the people at the time. It completely ruins their vacation, and it maybe ruins their trust in humanity for a while. But there are certainly larger losses that we face in our lives. And I think I was interested in the idea of sort of a small moment of loss like that being kind of a practice run for the larger losses in life. But to answer your question about the character specifically, I met my first freegan when I was living in Barcelona. So that gave me the idea for the freegan squatters.
I love that.
And for those of you who don't know, freegans, it's a portmanteau of the word free and vegan. So these are people who try and live without money. So they try and get everything for free. And they're also usually vegan, unless what they can get for free is meat, in which case they break the rules. But I met a guy in Barcelona who was living half the year as a freegan and the other half the year as a butler, like a butler to the rich. It was really unusual, and he always stuck in my head. So he was one of the inspirations. But mainly, I just did a lot of research. There's a lot of squatters in Barcelona. Mm-hmm. I went to a squat in Barcelona to do some research, and I volunteered there for a day as a cook. And they gave me a tour of the property, and it's this squat that's in a leper colony, or it's no longer a leper colony, but it was a former hospital for lepers in the countryside, and it's always had this kind of stigma around it that nobody wants to use it. So I think there were 16 families living there with their children. They had a community garden. They gave community classes. They had a trapeze school. And that place has their washing machine is on the side of a mountain, and it's attached to a bicycle that goes nowhere. So you just sit on the side of the mountain, and that ended up being in the book, and just some of those little details from meeting the squatters. When originally I tried to get into a squat in Barcelona, and I would sit in their backyard and there was a cat that would come in and out. So I like tied a note around its neck once and like sent it up, but they didn't come to the window. They never let me in. So I had to go to the one in the countryside, but yeah.
That's fabulous. And Nikki, I mean, she's so rich, right? Like she's one of those characters that when you meet them, um, sh- they don't she doesn't fully evolve in the novel, which I love because there's so much potential to imagine her continuing that, lost thing, although Zavi at the end gives grounds her somewhat. um, so I want to know, I'm specifically struck by her decision, or her lack of decision, to just go and get her debit card. Like at a number of times in the book, I'm like, oh man, she could just go get her debit card. But then she would be somewhere else, and I'd think, why is she so paralyzed? You know? And that's I wanted to speak about that, about the kind of psychology of Nikki, um, when she was Jane, and as she was walking through Barcelona.
Hmm. I think I wanted her to be constantly on the move. And she does think about, as you said, so she is, for those of you who haven't read the book, she is without money, which is part of how she gets into some very street involved activity, including becoming a pickpocket herself.
All
Um,
fantastic.
so aside from just that being a more interesting plot thing, um, I, I do think, I think originally I wanted to write about someone who was in shock, and this kind of numbness. Like a lot of my favorite books have, like Camus' The Outsider, or like some of Hemingway, or things which some people say that some ex-soldiers write with this kind of shell-shocked tone. And I've always kind of favored this like non-emotional kind of just like a, I just imagined her, I guess, sort of being in shock and stuck. I think because
Yeah.
she really thought this was like she was just about to leap into her best life, and then it just disappeared in a moment. um, and then, as I said a few minutes ago, that can really trigger some existential questions, like what's the point of
Yeah.
anything if everything's just going to disappear? What's the point
Yeah.
of like trying to make art, or of trying to, I don't know, be a good person or whatever? And of course there are points, but I think she's just like really kind of going through a bit of a deep existential shock that she's just kind of working through.
Yeah.
And rebuilding from the ground up involves bringing nothing with her, maybe from the past, something
Yeah.
like that.
I felt that, as that feeling of lost, and you mentioned Camus' The Outsider. I definitely had that impression of her as a character, and I loved, because of that, the title, because at many points in the novel, with her art and with Xavi, and the political stuff that's happening in Barcelona at the time, there really does feel, even subconsciously or unconsciously in the novel, like there's a, um, on the verge of discovery kind of feeling, but still very immersed in loss. And Proof I Was Here is such a great title, because I can feel her trying to get to that point, like you say, that feeling of pointlessness, her moving in the novel towards finding proof she exists
Mhm.
in some way. So talk to me about the title,
Okay.
and talk to me about the cover, because the cover is fantastic.
Okay, well, maybe I'll do those in reverse. So the
Okay.
cover looks like this, and my very good friend, Kilby Smith McGregor, was the designer on the book, which was like a happy coincidence. And she knows me really well. And she really like nailed exactly what I was looking for. And I always remember it was funny because she said, I used like the colors of the Catalan flag, and then I troubled it with some hot pink or whatever. And I was just like, I love it. I love it. You're a genius. But the image on the cover though is this statue that's on the beach in Barceloneta. And it's a really interesting piece of art by a German artist named Rebecca Horn. And she was commissioned during the Barcelona Olympics, before the Olympics, to, you know, make a piece of art for, this was near the Olympic Village. And without sort of running this by anybody, she created this piece, which is called the Wounded Star. And it's actually commemorating all the fishermen who lost their homes to make room for the Olympic Village.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very subversive piece of art. And it represents sort of homelessness for me. So I thought it was kind of a good image for the cover. And the title, I had tons of trouble coming up with the title. This book used to be called Yours to Keep, it was called for a while. And then it was definitely called Scratch. For a long time, I was really stuck on that. I really wanted it to be called that. And my editor at Wilsick and Wynn was like, that's a terrible title. He was just like having none of it. He was like, it sounds like a horror movie, you know, it's not a good title. And we tried so many other titles, like it really took a long time. And then all of a sudden, near the end of the process, it just, yeah, this kind of, for me, I mean, this is my first book. It took me a long time to write it. And in a way, it feels especially right because this book for me is also proof that I was here. And
That's so great.
it represents sort of you get to relax a little bit, knowing that there's like a little piece of you in the world. Once that happens, I felt some I felt some relief. I'd been working towards that for so long. But for Nikki, I think all art that we create it's proof that we were here. And you have to believe that there's some value to create art. You have to believe that there's some value to trying to leave that little mark. And I think for her, she hasn't totally got there by the end of the book, but she has started doing graffiti and painting murals. And I thought that was a perfect form of art for her because it's an impermanent art form. It sort of has obsolescence built into it.
Mm-hmm.
You never know how long it's going to last. Some graffiti lasts for a really, really long time. And some of it only lasts for a day. But just believing that it's important to the effort of trying to leave a mark is valuable or important, I think, for the artist and hopefully for anyone who sees it on that, even if it's just that one day.
Yeah.
Like, kind of create a ripple.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe that one person will make something themselves. You know, you never know. So
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I'm often struck by graffiti. I feel like it's lucky to live in Toronto. I know a lot of people feel the way they do about big cities, but I really do feel like in Toronto, because of graffiti, I'm surrounded by art all the time. Whether it's like, you know, gang tags or group tags or anything. I just love the idea, like you say, of imagining that moment of creation, whomever it is with the paint or the spray can. That moment of creation is always inspiring to me. I love that. And I also love what you said about waiting so long to get this book published. I feel that for myself, and I'm sure many writers can agree. And I'm glad that is
it's
here.
never too late.
I know. Okay, so the big thing I want to talk to you about, I'm going to kind of merge these two things to talk about writing process and, you know, having a big sort of life or, you know, segment of your life, having spent a few years in Barcelona and the inspiration that Proof I Was Here exists now because of those years there. I want to talk about the process of writing. How are you thinking or imagining more inspiration? What ideas do you have? What are you working on now? But just kind of bringing that all together as a
Mhm,
writer. How do you get
mhm.
there?
Well, that's an interesting question, especially right now, because this book was inspired by travel, which is not something that we can really do right now.
Yeah.
Um, I already have my next two books like started, so I
Oh,
feel like writing takes me such a long time that, I don't know if I'll ever catch up to my things that I am interested in. But I think I think that's the thing is if there are things that we're curious about as writers, and sometimes they're small questions and they can be answered in a short story or an essay. And sometimes they're really big questions, and maybe they're two intersecting big questions, and those just call for they're asking you, hey, do you want to spend a few years thinking about me? And yeah, that doesn't come that often, but it did come for Proof I Was Here. And I have started my next novel. And similarly, it's kind of, yeah, like it's a few different things that I want to explore. And it seems complex enough to hold my interest for an extended period of time. And hopefully that will translate to it being interesting for readers. I think inspiration just comes from, following your curiosity.
hmm
Mhm. Just there's so many things to learn. It's the old thing too about, as you get older, the less you know. And I feel like I could never catch up to all the things I want to write about. I have like an ideas,
Well,
document that I've
yeah,
had since I was like a kid. And I'd never even look at it. The only time I open it is to put the new idea at the top and to
you're
notice that
right.
it's like 47 pages long. So it's
Like
just
the
like,
like at the end of all this, your ideas journal is going to be bigger than anything you've written.
yeah,
That's
maybe.
that's
Yeah.
my fear, not an indictment. My own personal fear.
Yeah.
That's great. Does anyone have any other questions?
So we have a question from Lynn, which seems very kind of topical. And Lynn was wondering if there will be a sequel, as you're talking about future writing. She's wondering if there will be a sequel.
I'm not planning a sequel. I have had that question many times, several times, and usually I ask the person, what they would imagine happening in the sequel, and usually they say something about Manu, um, about about Nikki going to find Manu and like
Yeah.
I don't know, going to Ecuador or whatever. I kind of imagine that Nikki. I think I said this in an email with Allison, but I kind of imagine that she's. Well, actually, I don't want to say because it's kind of a spoiler, I guess. But I
Yeah.
imagine that. Yeah, never mind. But
I have a short story idea. I so want to see her picked up by the cops.
and
I just have a feeling of how she would react, like, and not a sequel because I love open endings. It's my favorite kind of book when an ending just ends with the reader lingering or dangling or
mhm.
reaching out for answers. I would just love to see her with the cops. I feel like there's 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 some Nikki that would come out in a confrontation like that.
I will say that I've always kind of hoped that someone would make a movie of this because there were alternate endings and they were much more dramatic.
Right.
Let's say there were a couple that involved police chases and even getting thrown in jail, and being in a detention center and being like expelled from the country and like very dramatic. There was roof jumping at one point,
Oh,
like
wow.
jumping from roof to roof. It was very much like an action movie.
Yeah.
I think because one of the mentors I worked with early on, he suggested that I think about it like an action movie, really like a Hitchcock film or something like really like a lot of tension.
Yeah.
But in the end, that didn't feel quite right. But I do always think, like, if Hollywood comes knocking, I mean, I have, you know, do they knock? Do they call? I don't know. Do they text? I don't know.
I think they just show up with cameras and they're like, we want your book. There were definitely some scenes in this novel for any of you who haven't read it. There are so many. The hotel under construction. There, because just as you said, the sort of action movie thing. Every single time they were in that hotel, I had like I don't know, maybe it's my own personal fear of falling, but I had this like fight scene. I mean, despite what we end up getting in the novel, every time we were in that building, I imagined like a what's that Bruce Willis movie in the building, the famous Christmas one. Anybody?
Oh,
Die Hard.
Die Hard. Yeah.
Every time they were in that building, I had this like Die Hard action feeling. So it's interesting that you say you wrote it as with the energy of an action movie, because that is how I felt. I loved it. I loved that hotel. That hotel. I mean, speaking of sequels, I mean, you anybody there. I know there are a lot of writers here. Writing a short story or a novel in a to be constructed hotel. Like
I lived beside that hotel in Barcelona.
I would read that. Yeah.
I did, and I watched it go up like floor by floor until the men were like right outside the window.
Right.
And then I watched them put all the beds in. That was really weird. Like just like a giant stack of beds, like the Princess and the Pea, you know.
Like they brought them from the outside inside each window. Oh
yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
So before
and I also stayed in the hotel when it was finished. It's a 5-star hotel. In a rough neighborhood, and everyone was so mad that it went up, you know. And it is completely circled by like thieves and sex workers and stuff. It's an attempt to gentrify their neighborhood,
right? But in essence, just depositing every tourist from all over the world into potential wallet stealing territory.
Yeah,
that's great. Does anyone else have any questions?
We had a question from Sylvia, who I think actually has been kind of disconnecting and reconnecting periodically. But Sylvia had the question that was, what reaction have you had from readers in Barcelona, and do you have any plans to do any readings there?
Well, Sylvia, if it's, I'm guessing my friend Sylvia, who I met in Barcelona, I wanted to do, I was planning to take the book to Barcelona just before COVID started. So I still hope that I can take it there, you know, sometime in the year ahead, maybe. I have had a few people, a few of my Catalan friends have read it. One of them kindly read it before it was published, just to make sure that it was like, you know, hadn't made any egregious errors with the politics and things like that. Yeah, I'm still hoping it might get translated, and then maybe more people there could read it.
That would be good. That would be really good. Thank you so much, Becky. I feel like this, we were originally going to have you in person at Anansi, and I feel like for any of the other social anxious people out there, this is a platform I've secretly dreamed of. But I look forward to having you in person with your next novel or your memoir. I know you're working on a memoir. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you everybody for coming. I noticed that Helen is here, AKA Hannah Brown. She is going to be, hi Helen. She is going to be with us here next Sunday. We're doing a kind of quasi-weekly, bi-monthly series this season, because I'm trying to fit in as many independently published authors as I can into these beautifully short and insightful and hopefully inspiring author talks. So Hannah, Helen is bringing next week, Look After Her. So please join us at 5 p.m. next Sunday. You can register on all of Junction Reads' upcoming events on eventbrite.ca. Just search for Junction Reads. And again, www.beckyblake.ca to find out and keep on track of everything new coming for Becky. And this video will be up on YouTube in probably 10 minutes. So feel free to share with your friends and subscribe to the YouTube channel so that more people can see videos of all of our authors. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are we going to do
the raffle?
A little raffle? Yeah. Sorry, I was just like, before we head off.
This is
I would love to send somebody a book.
This is exactly what Kaylee and I were talking about before the thing. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why would I ever forget the raffle? I'm not going to forget the raffle, but if I don't write it down, I do.
It's okay.
So we have two things. I'm going to raffle off a $20 gift certificate to the bookstore of your choice. So if you are in California or BC or Montreal or wherever you are, choose a bookstore and Junction Reads will buy a gift certificate for $20 just for you. And the second raffle is a signed copy of Proof I Was Here from Becky. And she, again, will mail that to absolutely anybody. So if you are the winner.
Even Sylvia.
If you're
Sylvia wins.
But you already have a copy and you would like Becky to send a signed copy to somebody else, we'll put you in touch afterwards. Okay, Kaylee, are we ready?
So so the first one, which is for the $20 gift card, goes to Kathy Friedman.
Kathy?
Still here? Yep, Kathy is still here.
Hey, congratulations, Kathy. Just send me an email to junctionrites, WRITES @gmail.com. And you just tell me what bookstore you want and I will make the arrangements.
Wonderful.
And now a signed copy of Becky's book.
All right. And the signed copy of the book goes to Leslie Davidson.
Yay. Leslie here?
Leslie's here.
Yay.
That's wonderful.
Nice. So again, Leslie, send me an email to junctionrites@gmail.com. Kaylee's got the address in the chat, and I will connect you with Becky and she can get that book out to you.
Wonderful.
Again, thank you so much, Becky. I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Allison and Kaylee, and thanks to everybody for showing up. It's so nice to see so many friendly faces. Really, really lovely.
Yep, that's great. Thanks. And see you guys next week or the week after or whenever. Hope you can join us again. Bye.